This is David Diaz, former WBC lightweight champion of the world, and you're listening to The Grueling Truth.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Inside Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Radio Network. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I want to welcome in my co-host, Jeremiah Preisser.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be on. Ready to talk about this week's fights?
Well, yeah, and unfortunately, the main fight we wanted to talk about, we can't talk about, at least not previewing a fight. That would have been Deontay Wilder against Alexander-Povetkin in Russia. Povetkin tested positive for meldonium. Did I get that right that time?
You got it right.
All right, there we go. So you want to explain to everybody what meldonium is?
Well, it's been a drug that's been legal in the Baltic states and Eastern Europe for a while. I mean, tons of Slavic athletes, Eastern European athletes have been taking it for a long time. It's the same drug that Maria Sharapova got knocked for earlier this year. But it's a drug it's meant to treat cardiac problems. People have heart issues. Apparently, it increases the blood flow, and it moves more oxygen to your muscles, which is supposed to enhance your stamina. Again, I'm reading what I have. It's hard to pin down whether or not it's actually a performance-enhancing drug. Victor Conti thinks that it has powerful effects. And, Victor Conti is a guy that I trust. He's been in the business a long time, but somebody like Dr. Don Catlin, he's one of the most respected people in doping research, and he doesn't seem to think that it's a performance-enhancing drug. So it's hard to say whether or not it is, whether or not it isn't. The research doesn't seem to be defined well. But the fact is that WADA banned it this year. And when I was looking at the testing, I was hopeful for a second because Alexander Povetkin tested positive for meldonium, and then his promoter said that, well, he took it in 2015. And I've read that it can stay in your blood for months. So for a little while there I was hopeful, but then Dan Rafael released a statement saying that Povetkin had actually passed drug test I think 2 or 3 drug tests before that. So he obviously took it after he had taken some other drug tests, and it's unfortunate because that was the biggest fight of the weekend. It was one of the best fights that could be made at heavyweight, and I was really looking forward to it.
So where do you think Wilder goes from here?
It's tough to say. I mean, he has a number of options. I suppose he could fight. I think Bermain Stavern is now the number 1 guy. Does anybody really want to see a rematch?
No.
I don't know. Some people, no. I mean, Stavern's a tough guy, but I think he barely got by Derek Rossi, a journeyman, in his last outing. Bermain Stavern is not. He doesn't really light it up. His best wins are against Areola, and Areola, he's just not top notch. He could fight Duapas, who I think just won the WBC's Diamond Belt or some
whatever the hell that is.
Yeah, whatever it is. So who's available at the moment? I'm not even sure who's available at the moment. It sucks. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it could be. What about a guy like Joseph Parker? We'll go ahead and start our previews then. Nah, we'll wait because I've got one thing I want to talk to you about. That would be Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. Does that fight make any sense at all?
No. Well, I mean, it makes financial sense because, as a hardcore boxing fan, I dislike the fight completely. It's a mismatch. I mean, you're going to have a guy who is 49-0. The guy who's a bona fide legend, aged or not, inactive or not, against a guy who, had good hands in mixed martial arts, but I'm not sure what that really says. McGregor, he's good, but if anybody was watching the sparring footage between him and Chris Van Heerden, you've got to have major, major doubts that McGregor is competitive at all. Honestly, it's just a complete mismatch. It's a farce of a fight, but I guarantee that some commission would sanction it. There's just too much money to be made, and that's all they really care about.
Would you pay to see it?
No, absolutely not.
No, because it's going to last as long as Floyd Mayweather wants it to last.
Right, yeah. I mean, I'm sure McGregor is tough enough to hang in there for a number of rounds, but it's just a mismatch. It'd be worse than Mayweather versus Arturo Gatti. It'd just be complete slaughter. But again,
and to me, it's bad for boxing.
It's terrible for boxing. I mean, we talked in one of the first shows that I did. I remember we talked about this chase for Rocky Marciano. Even though Marciano really doesn't hold a record. He holds a heavyweight record for the longest to stay undefeated and be retired. But there's kind of that mystique surrounding that 49-0, right? To go above 49-0, to even reach 49-0 is saying something for a fighter. But to make your 50th fight, to kind of to go 50-0 against a guy who is 0-0, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's just monetarily, whatever. I don't care about that. It just makes no sense. It does nothing for his legacy. And I think if Mayweather takes it, I think it will be even more indicative of the route his career has gone. More people will point and say, oh, well, he took the easiest fight for the biggest money possible. It's just not a good look.
Yeah, and it's a lose-lose situation for him anyways. There's no way he can win in that situation. There's no way boxing can win in that situation. UFC might be able to win in that situation if McGregor can take a beating for 6 or 7 rounds. But, I mean, in the end, it's a farce for boxing. It's bad for boxing. And, I don't think Floyd Mayweather really cares if it hurts his legacy or not, as long as he gets paid, though.
Well, yeah, that's what Mayweather's always been about. He's been about the money. When he was at 130, 135, he was hungrier. But when he became the money man, he just started milking it. It's just an unfortunate era. Because a lot of guys are starting to follow his lead. A lot of guys are doing the same thing. And this is why people are starting to gravitate more towards mixed martial arts. Whether you're a fan or not, they're doing many things right. They have 8 classes. Boxing should have 8, maybe 9. I wouldn't mind cruiserweight. They've got 1 champion per division, and you're forced to fight the best of the best. You don't get paid the same, and, again, that's unfortunate, but they're just doing it right. And this is why boxing will continue to suffer as long as these guys are allowed to play these politics.
And before we preview next week's fights, or this weekend's upcoming fights, we also have another man by the name of Canelo Alvarez, who fights middleweight championship fights 4 or 5 pounds below the limit, who now has decided to give up his belt. Do you think it's to try to get away from fighting Triple G?
Well, I do. I've been thinking about this. I've been mulling over it for a little while, and I'm trying to figure out why exactly Canelo would do this. And again, I know some boxing savvy guys who they tell me, Canelo and Golden Boy, they didn't want to go to purse bid because Golovkin, as the interim titleist, he would get a 55-45 split going into that fight. But it makes no sense for Canelo to vacate a week out. Let the negotiations play out, and then make your decision. And on top of that, I have very little doubt that the Mexico-based WBC would not give them an extension. The WBC, they've been biased towards Mexican fighters all along. If Golden Boy and K2, if they were like, hey, let's drag this out another 15 days, let's drag this out another 30 days, the WBC would heed their commands. On top of that, one thing that I also find unfortunate is that Oscar De La Hoya, so if you remember correctly, before Canelo and Cotto fought, Cotto decided not to pay the sanctioning fees for the WBC title, thus vacating, very close to the fight. And Oscar De La Hoya called Miguel Cotto a coward for that. And then we have Canelo doing something similar. It just makes I'm trying to figure out what exactly it is. Maybe we'll have some light shit on it real soon. Maybe it'll make some sense. But I think that they're just trying to put it off even longer. It wouldn't surprise me if, Canelo fights David Lemieux, who's another Golden Boy fighter. It wouldn't surprise me if they fight in the fall, and maybe in September of 2017, Golovkin and Canelo get together. It's just odd for me because, as we talked before, Canelo was dead set on getting the Erislandy-Lara fight, even though Golden Boy didn't want it. They knew what kind of danger that he posed to Canelo's record, and to his title. But Canelo's like, no, give me that fight. I want it. And then with this fight, it's just been so many excuses, one after the other. Oh, I want to fight at a weight I'm comfortable with. I don't want to give this purse split or that purse split, or I don't want to do this. I don't want to. It's just been so much off-putting stuff. And I don't know. I'm just confused by the whole situation. But now Golovkin holds 3 major titles in the division, and he's one step closer to unifying. If the Canelo fight doesn't come off, hopefully he gets Billy Joe Saunders and gets all 4 of the trinkets, or maybe he gets Danny Jacobs, which would be a pretty good fight too.
Yeah, I just don't see anybody competing with him in middleweight except possibly Canelo, and I think just the way Canelo's handling himself would tell me that maybe Canelo is not real confident about that fight either.
Yeah, and remember the shit he talked at the end of the fight, at the end of the Khan fight? He invited Golovkin into the ring and said, hey, I invited Golovkin in the ring. I wanted to show the world, that Mexicans don't fuck around. And then he vacates. And his excuse was he didn't want to be constrained to these arbitrary deadlines. It doesn't make sense to me. Arbitrary.
Yeah, and
deadlines.
he's also a guy, though, that wants to be the middleweight champion of the world, demand the fights be at 155 and then weigh in at 180 pounds.
Yeah, and he's done that many times in his career. He's made. Of course, I'm not going to say that he's made his entire resume off beating up little guys, but he's certainly known for it. Yeah, he beat up an old Shane Mosley, Carlos Baldomir, Matthew Hatton, et cetera, smaller Kermit Cintron. And I hear from Canelo's fans, though I think a lot will vacate. If Canelo just vacated so he didn't have to fight Golovkin, I think a lot will move to the Golovkin side. But Canelo said, they're talking about comfortable weights and whatnot, and it seems as if they're straddling the line between 154 and 160, so they can claim that they're not a full-fledged middleweight. Though obviously we know the post weights says a little bit differently, but they're straddling the line between 155 or between 154 and 160. But it's a way of kind of getting what they want, getting their cake and eating it too. And my problem, on top of this all, is that Canelo hasn't made the 154-pound limit in 2.5 years. He's a middleweight. Physically, he looks the middleweight. It was clear the size differences between him and Cotto. I don't think Cotto was ever a big 154-pounder, but Canelo looks massive compared to Cotto. I don't buy the weight issue. It's a non-issue to me.
No, I think he just uses it to his advantage.
Yeah, he is, and it just. If he and Golovkin were negotiating, apparently Canelo said that he still wants them to negotiate. I'm not sure what that means. But for me, again, the weight is a non-issue because Canelo would get everything else in his favor. He'd get to pick the ring size. He'd get the bigger purse split. He would, get home field advantage, home judging advantage, obviously. Some of the scorecards we've seen from some of his fights. Somehow he gets a draw against Mayweather on one card, and apparently he's beating Khan clearly on one card. He's got so many other things in his favor. The weight's a non-issue. Just man up and take the fight.
All right, so that brings us to the fights this weekend with guys that actually want to fight. We're going to start off down in Australia where we got heavyweight contender Joseph Parker against Carlos Takam, which I think Takam is 33-2. He beat Tony Thompson. I thought he beat Mike Perez. I know you said you thought he beat him too. It ended up being a draw. Gave Alexander Povetkin some problems until Povetkin knocked him out in the 8th round. How do you look at Parker and Takam? I think this is Parker's first real step up in competition.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I think a lot of us are excited about, his progression. He's looked real good down in New Zealand and Australia and whatnot. Takam I'd say he's about a top 10 guy. It's tough to say right now, but Takam, like you said, he's given a number of top 10 guys a tough go. from what I've seen of Parker, I like what I see. For a big guy, he's 6'4". He's got